Okay, everybody, welcome to the LGBTQ Caucus of the Metropolitan Council. I am going to quickly put up on the screen our agenda today, and you'll have an idea of what it is that we're going to be talking about as we go along. For the folks that are in the discussion, I will be clicking on some of these links so that you guys, if you ask me to, so that you can have those references. But with that, I will yield the microphone to Mr. Bradford if you want to start the meeting and get us going.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we'll just get started with review some of the action items we had from last meeting. So what we discussed last time was the health department policy on sharing information with law enforcement and first responders. After a thorough discussion, we all decided to sign on to Councilmember O'Connell's resolution asking for that policy to stop. Shortly after, the Board of Health actually did vote to end that program. So, win there. Then we proceeded to speak about the different substitute budgets, and we all agreed that any budget that lends our support would have to ensure that it maintains the current level of funding for the LGBT Chamber. As everyone knows, the Mendez substitute did pass, and it did include a restoration of the grants to the LGBT Chamber. And that is pretty much a high-level overview of our action items from last meeting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the overview. Everyone was provided minutes from that last meeting. They're available in our deposit. With that, I call for a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Motion.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, I believe we don't have anyone against, so that's good. With that, we're going to go ahead and move into recognition of some guest panelists for some reports and discussion. First up, Mr. Joe Woolley, the CEO of the Nashville LGBT Chamber of Commerce. He requested an opportunity to talk about the Metro grant for 2020 that was submitted, and an update on projected use of the 21 grant. And so with that, we welcome you, Joe, back for your report.
Thank you all so much for having me. And as Councilmember Bradford just stated, the Mendez budget that you all supported did extend the 25,000 full grant that we have received the last 2 years. And we're, on behalf of the Board of Directors and the members of the LGBT Chamber, we thank you for your support of that, and we are very appreciative to get those funds. We have worked very hard to spend those funds and make everybody, all the taxpayers, Metro, the council members, and everyone in Metro proud of us with doing that. I think our results speak for themselves. We have certified a record number of LGBT business enterprises, LGBT BEs as we call them, and we are continuing to do education with the Business Administration Office to connect those certified members to opportunities to do work with Metro. We just finished up and I received the letter last week from the mayor's office telling us that we got the full 25,000, thanking us for our work in the community. I do want to commend Mayor Cooper for his support for the chamber, his continued support. He gave a great speech for us on the Pride in Local Music event that we put on with our sister chamber, Austin LGBT Chamber of Commerce, and just a wonderful endorsement of our work, and we're very appreciative of that and the support of Metro. And I know all of you watch our work carefully. And I wanted to come and just tell you a bit about the numbers and then answer any questions that you might have. We have certified over 25 new LGBT BEs. The grant makes that possible. You know that we work in a lot of other areas as far as advocacy at the state legislature, keeping Nashville and Tennessee open and welcoming for business. And then educational opportunities for the community and for our LGBT and ally members. That grant money goes to specifically through the contract certify LGBT business owners. We are going to work with the mayor's office and Metro to maybe tweak the grant this year to write into the contract that the collaboration and excellence, which is something the minority chambers have always talked about, have it written into the contract that we must do. There are some minority chambers that work better with others than all of us, and we all need to be contributing to this to truly have a diverse program. I would love to see the mayor hire a diversity and inclusion officer again. That position is lacking, and I can tell you, working in this field, that leadership from Metro is needed to really keep this topic in the forefront. We're doing our part to do that, but being the LGBT chamber, we are the most diverse chamber. We have members of every race, religion, creed, and we focus on it. But there is a lack in Metro right now for some leadership there. And I know times are tough, but I do hope that will become an initiative again. And we'd love any support that you all can offer in that area. But we would like to tweak the contract where we have to work better together, and we're going to work on what exactly it's being spent on. Right now, it is only based on certifying members, and I think there needs to be continued educational opportunities, either a partnership with Metro, the area chamber. I think we could do a lot more with the area chamber, and then the other minority chambers as well. So we will get in early on this and get this new contract rewritten to address some of those things.
That's fantastic. As we all know, in the substitute budget was the funding for a diversity inclusion officer in the mayor's office, and so we're looking forward to hearing the timeline and execution of finding the right person for that position. And I know that it's our desire as the LGBTQ Caucus to make sure that the minority caucus is first and foremost being consulted in regard to that, and then we partner with that. In fact, I read something recently today from Vanderbilt that said it really well. Our advocacy must be intersectional. We cannot advocate for the rights of LGBTQ people without advocating for the rights of all LGBTQ people. Without advocating for them, it's not possible to fulfill our mission. Issues of race, gender, and sexuality are not separate. It's not enough to be non-racist, and we have to be anti-racist. And that means seeking out Black perspectives, learning how to be an ally, and learning how to speak up against racism when we see it. As I've mentioned before at the beginning of our meetings, even though the 5 of us represent our districts first, as an LGBTQ caucus, we recognize the fact that all Black lives matter, all gay Black lives matter, all lesbian Black lives matter, all bi Black lives matter, all transsexual Black lives matter, all trans lives matter, all Black lives matter. And it's good to note historically, as I believe all of us know, 2 out of the 3 women that started Black Lives Matter are lesbian, and Pride started with Black trans women having had enough. And so we embrace that as an LGBTQ caucus and recognize that our mission must be to be present when we need to have those voices heard to provide those platforms, right? So I appreciate you, Joe, coming to remind us of that and to provide us an opportunity to be helpful in any way we can to amplify as many voices as we can. There will be some comments I want to make at the end of the meeting on other business, but I wanted to just say that now before we got too deep in, that's where we are in our resolve to be representatives of all LGBTQ folks in Davidson County. So thank you, Joe. Anything else you have for us today?
No, if there's no other questions on the grant and the money that we get from Metro and how we spend it, I would just ask, I know I've looked at your agenda, and something that's very important for, as you know, council members to do is to fill vacant positions. The chamber does not we don't endorse candidates. We are doing a get out the vote campaign, Pride at the Polls, for early voting and for election day for both the primary and the general coming up. But I would ask that when you do look at filling vacancies, you really look at the candidates' involvement within the LGBT community and for equality across the board. That's something I would just ask you to look at and talk to each of the candidates that the council gets to consider with what they've done with the LGBT community, because I think there's some good information out there on the candidates.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming in to visit, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. Thank you all for your service.
Okay. All right. We are now going back to the agenda. Hannah Zeitlin is here from the council legal office. I had been asking for some insight, not necessarily advice, but insight, right, Hannah, on the effects of the Supreme Court ruling and the renewal or changes to the Metro procurement non-discrimination policies that were approved but preempted in 2011. And I see that we have a visitor. Hello.
Emily? Chester was knocking at the door, so I had to let him in.
That'll work for me. That'll make Hannah feel right at home, I'm sure. So Hannah, what insight can you give us?
Sure. So hang on, I've got notes and they got blocked out when the screen expanded. But
Hang on,
so
I'll pop it back out.
No, you're fine. So first, I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a rundown of the Supreme Court case, and then how that impacts the Metro law, and then I guess take questions. So first, the Supreme Court made a landmark ruling in Bostock versus Clayton County. It applied Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So now gay and transgender Americans are protected by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Basically what they said was, because the Civil Rights Act prohibits employers from discriminating against employees because of sex, that in order to discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity, it is inherent that you are discriminating based on sex. So that's what that case said. But keep in mind, this is a decision that's just based completely on Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's just interpreting that federal statute. So unlike, Obergefell versus Hodges, which was the same-sex marriage case, that was based on the 14th Amendment, on the Due Process Clause, on the Equal Protection Clause. This is a much more narrow application here. So the question that was posed to our office was whether this case allows for Metro to enforce the 2011 ordinance, and that's BL 2011-838. But unfortunately, that case doesn't directly impact the enforceability of the 2011 ordinance. So what is really the issue for the 2011 ordinance is state law. So the state law has not been preempted. It's not been struck down by federal law. It was not struck down by this case. So the way that the state law works, it's kind of a two-factor thing. So there's one statute that says that local governments cannot deviate from the definition of discriminatory practices in another state law. And basically what's important about that is that you can't make it a condition of doing business to comply with a metro law that deviates from the definition of discriminatory practice. It's kind of a, it's a pretty, long and complicated, prohibition, but the Tennessee law that defines discriminatory practice does not include sexual orientation or gender identity. And actually, there is Metro Legal also, they sent us an opinion, and I'm happy to send it to you all if you'd like to read it. Theirs is pretty much based on it. So the statute at issue is really the Tennessee Equal Access to Intrastate Commerce Act. And that's what applies the Tennessee Human Rights Act. It says that we can apply that we have to basically apply the Tennessee Human Rights Act to employers. And the Tennessee Human Rights Act has been interpreted differently from federal law. So they're similar laws, but they are separate laws. So they're interpreted a little bit differently. So until that Tennessee Human Rights Act is either amended or is challenged in court, there's the 2011 ordinance is still preempted.
So if I understand correctly, we wait for a lawsuit, and we encourage the mayor's office to request an update, and to watch for discussions regarding this. I mean, that's really what we can do.
Right. Yeah. There's not really anything that I think the council can actively do. There's not really anything that the council can do in response to Bostock to kind of revive this 2011 ordinance. And honestly, I'm not sure, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I'm not sure that the 2011 ordinance was ever taken off the books. So it's currently preempted, but I kind of think that if that state law were to go away, if that were to be amended, if it was to be struck down, I don't know if new legislation would be necessary. The interesting thing about the Bostock case is that it didn't say that Title VII protects discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. It said that sexual orientation and gender identity are inherent to sex. So discriminate based on those characteristics are discrimination based on sex. And sex is actually a protected category under the Tennessee Human Rights Act.
Okay.
So there's still a few more steps to go from there, but
are you, or as Metro Legal indicated, any knowledge of pending a lawsuit to challenge the
no, I'm not aware of anything. I'm maybe not out of the loop on that one, but
Zach, you have ACLU? Or
yeah,
something?
I mean, if I can interject, I don't know that the 2011 law now is even needed, because the thing is now, if there is someone who contracts with Metro that is discriminating based on sexual orientation, well, then they are discriminating by sex and therefore in violation of law already. Right. So, Hannah, do you the rabbit or the path I'm going down?
I do think that there may be a gap in where the federal law applies. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I do think that there are some differences. So I think that there's a good chance that somebody who is, being discriminated against based on sexual orientation, for example, could have a case under Title VII today that they wouldn't have had, a month ago even. Right. But I don't know that I don't know that I would go as far as to say that there's no reason to update the law, or okay, everybody is protected by this Title VII. I think that there might be some limitations on what the Civil Rights Act I think it's based on like the size of the company. But again,
Well,
I'm not
that's
100%
something that,
sure.
yeah, something I saw too, that the ruling said 15 employees, but the state says 7. There was some sort of disconnect and is actually even less than the required amount in the state legislature. You have to double check on that, but I read that somewhere. But I really appreciate you coming in and taking the time to explain this and have it in this public forum, because there's lots of questions about it. In a work for hire state, of course, you'd have to prove that that's why it is that they fired you anyway. So there's even, more and more hurdles to jump in regard to that.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say that if you guys are at all interested, this is the case is, the Supreme Court case is pretty interesting to read, and they actually say, so it doesn't have to be that you were only fired based on discrimination based on sex. If that was a contributing factor at all, I under the case, that is covered by Title VII now.
That's fascinating. I mean, there's my mind just thought of even the U.S. military, because I mean, wow. A lot has changed in the last 30 years. I welcome any comments or questions from my colleagues in regard to this.
Chair, I would just like to call out that I think it's only the nerds on this call who believe that it's interesting and fascinating to read a Supreme Court brief. But I concur with our staff attorney here.
Yeah, a caveat to that is you have to be a nerd to like it, but
we enjoy this work though, and that's what I love, is that we all enjoy this work, and we all are working to find ways to make things better, and we can only do that with that knowledge. But I thought that
and at 6 o'clock on a Friday night.
Yeah.
It's clear, isn't it?
But I was gonna say cocktails with the caucus, but I realized that would probably the right thing to do. We'll do that later. If you have the Metro legal analysis that you had, if you want to go ahead and send that to us, that'd be great. That way we have it in as a reference item. That'd be fantastic.
sure.
And for my colleagues, I encourage you, if you haven't, to look at that link, the reference of the 2011, and look at who voted how. It's quite fascinating. What's happened. So it's a good piece of history to be aware of. Thank you, Hannah. Did I leave anything out that we should know about?
I think that covers it. So if there aren't any questions, I might hop off.
Okay, cool, man.
I'd raise my hand. I know sometimes we don't.
Oh, I didn't see. Yeah.
Yeah,
I do see that now. Sorry.
It's hard to predict how we're gonna do this thing, but one of the things that and of course you don't have to answer us today, but one of the things that I'm really interested in is religious exemptions, or if there are religious reasons why an organization would still be able to make employment decisions based upon this factor, or even on sex. Just didn't know if that was something that was raised in the case.
So it's not something that was raised in the case. I'm honestly not super. I mean, I don't practice law under, I'm not like doing much with these, Title VII cases, but I'm honestly not aware of like any kind of religious exemption for this. But no, that's an interesting question. I mean, I'm trying to think, like, I don't know that like you could claim a religious exemption to discriminate based on race, which is something that's been protected, alongside sex, since 1964, I think. But yeah, no, I can look into that too. Yeah, I'll look into that.
That's one of those reasons probably the Supreme Court is allowing the state, because the state might do that, whereas obviously we just need the Equality Act to pass, and then all these issues are resolved, right? So fantastic. Anything else from anybody? I'm looking for hands. I didn't even realize that you could raise your hand on the Zoom call, so thank you for showing me that. Anything else? Beautiful. Thank you, Hannah. Enjoy your weekend. And
Thank
thanks
you all
for your
very
hard
much.
work. We don't get enough thank yous, so thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, buddy. Yay. Okay, so we're gonna pop back over and take another quick look at the agenda while we get ready to hear from Brandon. Brandon Marshall is the Mayor's Office LGBTQ liaison. And he, before I even started asking questions about this Supreme Court ruling, he had already taken it upon himself to do a review of the HRC Municipality Equality Index on Nashville, and has done a deep dive into it, and has an update as to what he's found and what next steps may be possible, and how we can move forward on some ideas. So with Brandon, I'll send it to you, and if you have something you want to share on the screen, I can do that, or I have some stuff.
I do have a PowerPoint to share. Am I able to?
I am making it to where I can do that. There, I think you
I
should
see the
be able
button, share my screen.
There you go. You should be
Let me
able
see.
to.
Let's try this.
Here it is.
Does that work?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for having me. Let me just go from the beginning. Cool.
There you go.
And let me just take that off. Okay, well, so the HRC Municipal Equality Index, every year, their Human Rights Campaign, they'll release their annual MEI score. So this year, they're going to release the 9th annual Municipal Equality Index. And it's a way to see how inclusive cities across the country are towards the LGBTQ community. So what basically they do, they look at all of the municipal ordinances or laws that protect LGBTQ people. Last year, 506 cities were rated. And before HRC releases this year's report, they're giving cities the opportunity to submit documentation to improve their score. If you are unfamiliar with this, the scorecard basically allows cities to earn up to 100 points based on 5 sections. The non-discrimination laws, municipality as an employer, municipal services, law enforcement, and leadership on LGBTQ equality. Nashville does have local HRC representatives who are probably far more knowledgeable of this than I am, but I'm talking tonight briefly because on behalf of the mayor's office, because last year Nashville received a 70 on their scorecard, and I'm hoping to present some more information to HRC to hopefully bring our score up a little bit more. So in 2019, 88 cities earned the maximum score of 100 points. That was up from 78 cities from the previous year and just 11 when this started in 2012. Last year's average score was about 60. And again, Nashville, we are right now at 70. So there are 5 sections. For the first section, HRC looks at each city's non-discrimination laws. So in this section, this category evaluates whether discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity is prohibited by the city, county, or state in areas of employment, housing, and public accommodations. If you look at the municipal column, you'll see that the left side, basically, we have the opportunity to earn a total of 30 points, but we did not score any points. We have a 0 out of 30, and that's basically because of we are unfortunately preempted by the state, and we were kind of just talking about that just now. So because of the Equal Access Act, like we mentioned in 2011, this prohibits local governments from imposing on any person by ordinance or any other means an anti-discrimination practice or standard that deviates from the types of discrimination recognized by state law. Under the Equal Access Act and the Tennessee Human Rights Act, sex in the context of discrimination is defined as sex, meaning and refers only to the designation of an individual person as male or female as indicated on their birth certificate. So with that said, we might have some ordinances in place, but we can't get credit for that because we're preempted by the state. But HRC knows this, and therefore there is kind of a workaround. In each section, they try to offer what's called bonus points. And one of the bonus points in this non-discrimination law section, they allow, let me back up just 1 second. They allow in this bottom part, they give cities an opportunity to earn bonus points if they have single occupancy, all gender facilities. So Nashville has 2 codes, which I'm hoping we can qualify and earn some points in this bonus category, because we do have 2 ordinances or 2 codes that basically, instead of saying all gender signs, we have unisex signs on single occupancy facilities throughout Metro. So I was able to put these 2 codes in a report. I compiled basically a report to send to HRC. So I'm hoping that they will look at this and give us, I guess, the 2 points that we can qualify for. In the next section of the scorecard, section 2 is municipality as employer. And basically this section, by offering equivalent benefits and protections to LGBTQ employees, awarding contracts to fair-minded businesses, and taking steps to ensure an inclusive workplace, municipalities commit themselves to treating LGBTQ employees equal. So in this section, you'll see last year we received a 20 out of 28. This year, I'm hoping to include the Metro's inclusive workplace. I'm hoping to score some points there. Basically, we earn credit. Am I on my right slide? We earn credit for non-discrimination in city employment. We earn a credit for the city contractor non-discrimination ordinance, and we earn a bonus credit for city employee domestic partner benefits. But I'm hoping to earn 2 more points in inclusive workplace category by submitting Metro's LGBT inclusive diversity training handbook. So we are allowed to provide that if we have it, and we do. So hopefully we'll be able to get 2 more points in this section. We do not have in our employer Metro, we cover some healthcare benefits for transgender inclusive, but we don't cover the surgery. So it's either all or nothing, and basically because we don't cover the surgery, we can't earn any points in that category. In section 3 looks at municipal services, and this section assesses the efforts of the city to ensure LGBTQ constituents are included in city services and programs. You'll see here we have a 12 out of 12 in terms of the top score, but on the bottom half, we also receive some bonus points. We receive 2 bonus points because the city provides services to HIV and the AIDS population. I'm hoping to earn credit under the bonus category. Cities provide services to LGBTQ youth, which is right here. We can earn 2 points in that category because I was told, since we had the t-shirt fundraiser that the mayor's office put on in collaboration with the fire department and Metro Nashville Police Department. If we show that we did do some type of a fundraiser towards sponsoring an LGBTQ organization, specifically that works with youth, that is a way to qualify for that category. So I have that compiled in a report to send to them, and we'll see what they say in that regards. I'm also hoping to earn credit under the other bonus category, Youth Bullying Prevention Policy for City Services. And basically for that, HRC looks at different policies across different metro departments, and they look to see if the departments have an ordinance or some type of, well, I guess ordinance that expressly prohibit bullying based on sexual orientation and gender identity in all youth facilities. So with that being said, the Metro Department of Parks and Recreation, Metro and MNPS, as well as the juvenile court system, they have ordinances that have anti-bullying policies, and they address different anti-bullying policies when it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity. The library is also something that deals with youth. The library does not have a specific ordinance, but they do have an anti-bullying program. So I contacted the library, and they were saying that they are open to perhaps putting together an ordinance that specifically discriminates or that addresses bullying and discrimination against sexual orientation and gender identity. So that's another possibility. But with the Metro Parks, Metro Nashville Public Schools, as well as the juvenile court system, I will offer that to HRC and see how much we can get credit for. Basically, this is just, again, a bonus category, and I think you're only awarded up to 2 points. So in section 4, you'll see we scored 22 out of 22 last year, and that'll be the same thing for this year as well. And the reason for that, section 4 deals with law enforcement. We scored 10 out of 10 because we do have an LGBTQ police liaison, and we have a 12. We scored a 12 out of 12 because they reported the 2020 and the 2017 hate crime statistics. This year, it would be the 2018 hate crime statistics, which the police department, they have already done. So this section should not change. And then the last section is leadership on LGBTQ equality. We scored an 8 out of 8 last year. We should probably still be able to do the same thing. We also have 5 out of 5 when it comes to all the bonus points as well, because we have organizations and groups such as the LGBT Caucus, and we have elected officials who are openly gay or LGBT. And we also have been recognized because city tests limits of restrictive state laws. So that goes back to what we were talking about. Even though we are preempted by the state in certain things, we still are very LGBT inclusive. We might not look like that on paper, but Nashville is pretty much, we are working towards trying to be more LGBT inclusive than we already are. So with that being said, that is what, all the things that I mentioned. I put together a report to send to HRC. I'm hoping to perhaps, out of each section, maybe ask to see if we can earn credit. Maybe if we can earn 4 to 6 extra points, depending, or 4 to 8 extra points. It may not seem as like a lot, but I guess in what I want to say is basically every little thing counts. But again, a score doesn't just reflect how Nashville treats our LGBTQ community, but it's still important to kind of at least make others aware that we are a city that is LGBT inclusive. So I'll see what they say, and I will let you all know.
Thank you so much for that report. Brett, I see your hand is up.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to Brandon for your work on this, which is so important. At a prior LGBTQ Caucus event, we had HR Director Shannon Hall as a guest, and we sort of talked about the challenges, but opportunities remaining, I guess, in terms of regards to transgender healthcare. So that's something that we should, as a city and as a caucus, continue to revisit with the benefits board whenever we can, to keep pressing on that issue in particular. One of the things I wanted to ask about, because I haven't reviewed that list recently, is how does Nashville's score or anticipated score compare to our peer cities in Tennessee specifically, or maybe also in some of our other southern states, which often have a lot of state preemption? How do we look compared to some of our neighbors and peer cities?
I can tell you right off the bat, when I look at a city, especially like Atlanta, I looked at their score, they have 100, and it's similar to their city is basically like Nashville. You know, it's a blue city in a red state. So I'm trying to figure out how they scored a 100. In terms of other cities like a Chattanooga or Memphis, I'm not sure where they score, but it's possible, especially if you're in a predominantly quote unquote red state. So I actually will be going to or attending a virtual LGBT liaison conference that they're inviting other liaisons in different cities to attend. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to try and learn some more information from, just to see how they go about it. But you mentioned Shannon. Shannon's she's been very helpful. She provided the diversity training, the LGBT diversity training, because we've had that training in place, I think, for maybe 2 or 3 years. So we just were never recognized for that. So a lot of the things that I'm presenting to HRC will not be anything new. But I guess we just weren't recognized for it. I'll have to see why that may have been the case last year. Because Nashville, we've had a score of 70, I believe, for the last 2 years. So just to put that out there. So I just had to look through different tidbits, but I'll let you know. But yeah, it is interesting. Atlanta, once again, they have a score of 100, and they're doing things. They're someone to look. They're a place to look at.
If you would take a look at the Memphis in particular, I guess I'm really interested in, but also maybe Charlotte or a couple of those other cities, because I know North Carolina's from some of our council colleagues that we've known in the past. You know, North Carolina is also harshly preemptive. Georgia may or may not be as bad, but yeah, I'm really interested in Memphis and maybe Charlotte, Birmingham, maybe a couple other cities like that. So really appreciate your work on that.
Cool. Mr. Bradford, you were up next.
Thank you, Chair. So Brandon, when you were talking about some of the policies within Metro departments, you mentioned the library was looking at doing something. What could we as a caucus do to help support them updating their policies on bullying?
They seemed very open to the idea. I would just, if I were to maybe ask them again, I would just say that the caucus, I would say that the caucus has encourages that they do that. I think it's just a matter of when, because like I said, they talked about having a bullying, they have a bullying program. I guess at this point, I would just ask for support in that, not necessarily singling out anyone in particular over there. This was all new for me, I'll just say that, because I mean, I only had about less than a month to kind of put this together, and I'm still learning day by day about all the different, just the language, perhaps. and reaching out to the different departments. Everyone who I did reach out to, they thanked me for doing, I guess, the important work. And they said that they were open to updating things on their end. So yeah, if something needs to happen, I'll definitely reach out to the caucus and just to see if I can maybe get a more authoritative support in the matter.
Yeah,
Maybe just a letter from us or something saying that we support you.
Yeah, that's probably what, I'm sure that would be more than enough. But yeah, that would be definitely appreciated if, I guess I should have just said that.
what?
I'm sorry, Chair. Oh.
No, I was just wondering what the language that Parks is using, I would think would be a good boilerplate for any Metro department that has contact with youth, as well as schools, right? So if you could send that language to Mr. Bradford as our secretary, then that could help us, create a letter to encourage, to thank those that are already doing it, and encourage others that could very easily do it as a matter of policy change. It doesn't require legislation, but just as a policy change.
And that's exactly right. Yeah, just a policy change, and that would be very helpful. I do have an example of what an anti-bullying policy can be. I can send that to you. And basically, HRC, they're only looking for two things. They just want to make sure that the word sexual orientation and gender identity is included in some type of anti-bullying policy. We can also throw in gender expression in there just for the heck of it, because that's also important as well. But as of right now, they only look for sexual orientation and gender identity.
It's good, and I appreciate you, Brandon. You're focusing on the equality index, getting the numbers up, and what that means to a city as we bring new employers here, and they look at that. I get that, but as a caucus, we want to make sure, regardless of what score it gives us, that every single department in Metro that has any contact with youth has a policy in place. And so what would be very helpful, I think, is for you to give us a list of who already has it and who we should encourage to also have it. And then we'll send a letter to each of those department heads and encourage them to do so and publicly acknowledge, because I think that if we can, as a group, then say out loud that all Metro departments that have any dealings with the youth have an anti-bullying policy, then that's something that we can really shout about. I think that could be positive in a situation right now where we need more positivity. You also mentioned, and we had discussed this gender expression. This was brought to us by the Stonewall youth out of Just Us at our first meeting. This idea that even with the youth opportunity programming, that there were some youth that weren't applying for it because they did not see that in the policy. I know that sometimes it takes a bit of education in regard to how youth in Nashville that may claim a non-binary state or be identify as female, but express themselves in masculine clothing and therefore get bullied. It doesn't have, however you express yourself may or may not have anything to do with your orientation or your identity. It's like that's just how I like to dress. I don't know what's going on, right? It's the Annie Hall thing. I don't know. So if in our encouragement for people to add the anti-bullying policy, if we include it, I think that would mean a lot to the youth that have come to us asking for something like that to happen. Zach, your hand is up. you've got the floor.
Thanks. Something I noticed going through there, and I want to make sure the rest of the caucus took note of, is that I think it was 5 points that we got for having a designated LGBTQ liaison in the executive or the mayor's office. So that's cool. Of course, Brandon likes that because that's him, but that's something I'm glad to see that that Mayor Cooper felt strong enough about, that we continue to have that. So that was 5 points, which seemed to be, when looking at all of that 5 points was kind of a rather large number, it looked like. Something else I noticed, not on all of them, but on some of them, it looked like we could have gotten points for something on the county level, because it showed state, county, and city. And so I wonder, being a consolidated city county, if maybe we can get county points too. I don't know how that would work. That one
Yeah,
almost
I'd have
kind of
to-
be like playing the numbers, but
I'd have to go back and look to answer that. Like in part 3, it talks about municipal services. So there's a total of 5 points that you can get for the having a human rights commission. But they also look at, it's weird how they have it, because there's 2 columns. There's one for county and then there's one for municipal. But we score 5 out of 5 in the municipal, but 0 for the county. But you can only get 5 points. I'm not sure how that works also. So I mean, so we still get, and even like for enforcement mechanism in Human Rights Commission, it's a 2 out of 2. We have the 2 in the municipal column, but it's a 0 in the county column. And again, I'm not sure why, but we have all we maximum. But yeah, I had noticed that too, and I don't know why it's like that.
You mean you didn't write it, so you don't understand why it's like? No,
I didn't know that.
And then, I think Councilman Bradford, I think, started to hit on it a little bit. I guess as you go through more, looking more in depth and trying to round up stuff for points for things we already do, I guess I would really like to see, maybe, is there a list of action items that might need council action, or anything that we can be doing to be more friendly? That is something that is not against state law.
I think,
I don't expect you to answer that now. I'll just say, as you come across things.
Well, I know that we've encouraged the mayor's office to draft any legislation that the mayor's administration drafts to bring it before the caucus, so that we can give any inside input and sponsor together, so that it's a group action. But I don't know, Brandon, if you've been able to formulate action steps on things that this mayor is hoping to get accomplished.
not at this time, but I do have a list that I would like to put before and see where that goes. So I've been making notes just by going through all of this, some things that I can ask for support. So I will let you know.
Cool. Emily, did you have any questions? All right, cool. Brandon, did we cover everything that you had hoped to be able to communicate to us today?
Yes, I think definitely. I'll go back to look at compare Nashville to some other cities. And I can just update you guys maybe via email if that's okay. And then anything else that may come up tonight that I'll remember, I'll definitely communicate that with you all, and definitely put together kind of some sample language for the library.
Fantastic. Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time on your Friday evening to do that. And I look forward to collaborating even more. So thank you, Brandon.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Adios. All right.
Now the fun part.
Now the fun part, right? No, it's funny. So we are now on our agenda about the discussion of nominees for the vacant school board District 4 seat, which is the the late and great Miss Shepherd's legacy. And this, of course, is coming before the council just next Tuesday. In a previous appointment, we had, as a caucus, decided to vote as a whole for a particular nominee. Anytime that there's an opportunity to kind of discuss these things, then we can. It doesn't mean that we have to come up with a conclusion to vote one way or the other, but it allows us to at least talk about it, which is, as you know, harder and harder to do, to even have conversations. I wanted to kind of just open the floor and see if anybody has any particular input in regard to the nominees that have been presented.
I guess I'll just, oh, sorry. I have a short question.
Go ahead.
I don't know of, do any of them identify as LGBTQ? Not that I'm aware of, but I just want to throw that out there.
None of the candidates have self-identified as LGBTQ. I don't know that.
I asked that because there was some other appointment one time, and I didn't realize someone was. Yeah, all right. Just wanted to be clear.
None of the candidates have reached out specifically to the caucus for support. I know that they've been all over all of us for different reasons and in different ways, but they haven't specifically asked for the caucus's support. I don't know that any of the candidates has specifically expressed an agenda one way or the other in regard to support or lack of support of the bullying policy or non-discrimination policy on the Metro School Board. So I don't, those would kind of be the hot points for this caucus. They go, wow, they're extremely supportive or they're extremely not supportive. I mean, none of those things have happened by any of these candidates in general that I know of. Does anybody else have any information? Yes, Russ.
So I tried my best when I did my phone interviews with all of them. I asked the same questions to each one of them and kind of had like a little scorecard I made. But I did ask Dr. Chauncey about, because the one question that everybody I asked was about culture and diversity. And so I wanted to make sure that part of that culture and diversity did include LGBT youth. And he did mention that under his tenure with some of the schools he ran, that he did make a big push to, everybody is accepted, everybody's tolerated, that everyone is made to feel welcome in the schools that he was principals at. So I think that's the most that I've gotten out of some of the candidates about their stance on LGBT. As far as our discussion tonight, since there is no LGBT candidate, I assume that this was probably just going to be us maybe discussing who we liked and maybe any things that we learned during our discussions that we think everybody else should know.
Yeah, I think that we kind of laid the baseline as to the fact that it's sort of neutral at this point in regard to the LGBTQ caucus. We can, I think, knowing that all things are even at this point, can now just talk to each other about what we've heard, what we've learned, and offer each other insight, but then to agree as a caucus that we will vote independently, because there's no particular reason as a caucus to vote as a whole. Is that the consensus I'm getting? We may all vote the same way, but it wouldn't be as a caucus because of
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'd like clarification on that. I think that if we all were supportive of XYZ candidate, then, or if 3 of the 5 of us were supportive, regardless of any LGBTQ support or not, hopefully we wouldn't choose someone who doesn't support LGBTQ equality, but regardless of any positions in regards to LGBTQ issues, is it fair to I don't want to assume, but is it fair to say that if we all agree on a certain candidate, regardless of the LGBTQ concerns, that would be the candidate as a group if we decided to vote as a block? Or you suggest?
I hear you, and I think that there will be. I think there will be times, and I don't know that this might be one of them that it would be appropriate. My concern is that we would not want to, as a caucus, vote in total for a candidate as the LGBTQ caucus without first fully vetting how they feel and what they've done and what they plan to do in regard to our community. And none of them have offered that independently. And honestly, my bandwidth has not been to go and ask them. I had hoped that one would on their own do that. Hopefully there'll be other issues to where people will want our support, to where they tell us these things. But having not received it, and with the vote coming up just next week, I would, I want to hear everybody's opinion as to who they're voting for and why. That's just kind of where I'm coming from. I'm just one of the 5 of you.
That helps to clarify, though, because I think that very much helps to clarify. So thank you, Chair. And that, if somebody had come out and said, or if they still do come out and say, hey, this is an important part of my platform, and that when I get to the school board, this is one of the things I'll be focused on as a part of everything else that I do, then I think that absolutely is appropriate for us to get together on. But I also see that without that, I understand. You helped to clarify that. Thank you. So as long as I have the floor for a second, I'm in support of Stephanie Bradford and Dr. Berthina. I'm not McKinney. I'm not sure if she goes by Nava or Nava McKinney, but I'm in support of both of those women. Stephanie Bradford is my first choice. Her resume is phenomenal. Her drive. I think a lot of times it requires a strong personality, as the 5 of us all know, to get some things done. And in my experience in communicating with her over the past few weeks, she has that drive, and I believe she also has the ability to find common ground, so that I think she'd be a valuable asset on the board. Should she not make it through the first round, if there are rounds, then Dr. McKinney would be my second choice. She also, I believe, is very qualified and would do a superb job. Additionally, brings an additional diverse perspective to the board, which I think we need to continue as we look at diversity of our city, that we focus on making sure everybody has an equal voice. I think that it's time for that now more than ever. And although, many of us may think that we could look through someone's lens, we really can't unless we've walked in those shoes. So anyway, that's where I stand with the 2. And the other 2 are great, but I think that these 2 women are the most qualified.
Amen.
Jerry, you're muted.
Russ, your hand is up, so go ahead.
So a couple of things before I get to who I'm supporting. Listening to the conversation between Councilmember Benedict and the chair, it may be something for us to consider going forward when there are situations that there there's an opportunity to put a nominee on, whether it's a school board or a board or commission, that we agree when we do our separate interviews with these individuals, if we choose to do so, that we make sure that we ask about their stance on LGBTQ issues. That way, when we do have a caucus meeting that's close to a vote, we can say, well, we did talk about that, and here are the candidates who spoke well on the issue. And then we could say, if they're not LGBT, we can at least say, we as a caucus understand that this individual would be a good ally for our community, and therefore we choose to support them. So we could probably look at doing something like that, maybe adding that to our charter or our mission statement. That would be something we would do.
I think it's a good idea to do that. Brett and I both know that these are supposed to happen very rarely, and for some reason they keep happening. And so I would not be surprised if we do not have another one of these the rest of our term. At the same time, I would not be surprised if we have one every 6 months. I know, so it's like, in preparation for that, if you'd like to draft, 3 or 4 questions that are the ones even that you had prepared for the calls you've already had, and give that to us, then I think that'd be really helpful. Did you have any inklings one way or the other for a candidate?
Yes. So I've spoken with all 4. And like I said, I asked the same questions and kind of did a check, like I did a check mark or a minus if I liked their answer. And using that system, my top 2 at this point is, my first choice is Miss McKinney. My second choice is Dr. Chelsea. Miss Bradford, the question that she kind of, I don't want to say messed up on it with me, but our ideas and our opinions on how to utilize technology in our schools today, we weren't on the same wavelength, we weren't on the same page. And so that pretty much is what dropped her out of my top 2, because the other 2 candidates that were in my top 2, they hit the marks on every question. So they had perfect scores. And I think it's no surprise with my opinion on charter schools that John Little was never going to be my first or second choice. So that's where I'm leading. My first vote is going to be for Ms. McKinney. If she doesn't make it, then it'll be for Dr. Chelsea.
Brett, your hand is up.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm known as being a thorough council member and have not had time yet to do what some of my colleagues have done, which is to speak to all 4 candidates. So I've been blowing off all 4 candidates until I'm ready to speak to all of them, and I hope to do that this weekend. I did print out, I think it's 39 pages of information that we got from the clerk about the 4 candidates. It's one of the things I'm hoping to do perhaps this evening, because it's just me and my cat. But to review that information and maybe begin speaking to the candidates tomorrow. But Councilmember Van Rees, you and I both have been through a number of appointments that the council had to make during the last term. And one thing that I just want to state on, I think it's important for whomever views this, not only for us, this caucus, but for whomever views it. You and I have not always voted for a candidate who was LGBTQ. There are, that is a factor that we consider. It's not the only factor. Sometimes that's been controversial. The fact that you and I have voted for a candidate who was not an LGBTQ identifying candidate. So it's really is about finding what we feel is the right fit for that role, for that experience, for the community, the moment that the community's in at that particular time. Charter schools definitely are controversial. They're a little bit less, I think, controversial than they were earlier in the decade. But what I do want to say for Mr. John Little is that John Little is a passionate advocate for children, and in particular for African American children. In District 6, we do not necessarily have a large African American population as a percentage of our population, but the African American children in District 6 are disproportionately the underserved children in our district on a number of categories. And that really is kind of how I personally have gotten to know John Little, is from advocating on a lot of those issues. I really sort of valued, one of the things I valued about former school board member Anna Shepard is that I think she's kind of like me, is that one of the things I valued was that I felt like she didn't necessarily, she had a starting point, but could be persuaded. And I felt like she was a person who listened to both sides and tried to make the best decision she could based on the merits of the argument and the case. And again, about how it fit into overall decisions. So sometimes Anna Shepard did not vote for charter schools and sometimes she did. And that kind of, for me, is a little bit of what I'm looking for, is someone who is not going to introduce partisanship to the school board. I want to look for a candidate who is very invested in the schools in District 4 specifically, and of course that's the McGavock cluster. The McGavock cluster is very different than schools in East Nashville, because in East Nashville our schools, especially our zone schools, are underpopulated. They are so underpopulated and underused that they're almost going to be at risk of closure because they aren't enrolled enough. In the McGavock cluster, the schools are over-enrolled so much that it's just a very different scenario. So what I want to say for John Little is that he's been a passionate and maybe even a fierce advocate for children, and especially Black children, to make sure that their needs and their educational needs don't sort of get overshadowed by some of the political overtones that go in the day, and I appreciate that. Some people have different opinions about how folks go about that, but I want to say for the record that I appreciate his advocacy. John Little has advocated for schools here in District 6 with the very best interests of Black children who are underserved in mind. And I'm interested in having a conversation perhaps with him about how he feels that that works within the confines of the District 4 cluster in particular. So I just want to put that out there. I haven't made a decision yet. I look forward to reading the 39 pages of information and speaking to all 4 candidates. But I'm pleased that though they have different styles and different backgrounds, that I think we have some really good candidates to choose from all around who bring different experiences, but also a lot of passion to this vote. It's going to be a tough vote, but I look forward to the final decision, and thank all the candidates for putting themselves forward, and having multiple good choices is a good problem to have. So that's it, but thank you.
Zach, did you want to pontificate?
I do not wish to pontificate. I just wish to say that I agree, and I think that Emily summed up how I feel quite well. And so, back when David Briley was the vice mayor during public hearing, when there would be several people lined up, he would say, if the person before you said something you agree with and you don't have anything to add, just say ditto. So on the advice of David Briley, I recommend that I'm just going to say ditto.
Ditto.
I don't want to put this on the public record, but I have a story about the word ditto that I will share offline someday, probably somewhere at a campaign event. It will be public information. It's just a funny story, not for public recording.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay,
but
now
the word
now
ditto always means something special to me.
Okay, good, juicy. Well, that leaves me. I am highly swayed by the endorsements that Ms. Bradford has received from the MNEA and the SDIU, I'm also highly persuaded by what happened in neighboring District 9 at Neely's Bend, and Mr. Little's part in taking over that school. And it would be inappropriate for me to support anybody who had any part in that. So I'm just unable, as a representative of my district, of 58, I think is what we figured out, % of my district being in Madison, for me to support that. I don't think charter schools are evil. I think that charter schools should happen when the school board feels like they should happen. And to allow the school board that to be something in their toolbox that is either used or not used. But I don't like the idea of the state deciding that for us, and I don't like the idea of the school board not being allowed to make that decision on their own. And Mr. Little's actions in the past are not aligned with that. And so I go back to the endorsements, particularly the SEIU, because there's so much needs to be done for the staff in MPS, that having an advocate there to support that. I know that she'll find a colleague in Frida Player if she makes it to that seat. So those are Nancy's reasons. And I like you, Brett. My bandwidth is shot. I'm still trying to. There's going to be another really big amendment packet that comes Monday. We're going to have to keep doing what we do, but that's my that's my 2 cents as to where I am on that particular thing. Are there anybody else want to do any more discussion on that matter on our agenda? I don't think so. Okay. So that moves us just to other business. Does anybody else have other business? I've got one thing. Anybody else have anything?
I've got one thing. Well, since you brought up the amendment packets on Monday, I was just want to give everybody an FYI, but I'll let you go first.
Oh, now I'm curious. Well, as it matters to the LGBTQ caucus, I have another business. I've been in appropriate contact with the minority chair, Sharon Hurt. I listened to, and I encourage you all to listen to the recording of their meeting so that you can kind of see what's happening there, because I want to specifically find opportunities to ally with what they have front of mind. And there has been some action to get Black Lives Matter painted on a street in Nashville. And I have presented to her the idea of having at least one of those letters be in the rainbow colors, including the trans flag. And she thinks it's brilliant to be able to collaborate in that way. But at the same time, I express that we don't want to take over that program. That's theirs to do, but we want to be able to show that collaboration. And so if they're able to do this, I think that the mayor's office has sent the minority caucus to Metro Arts to kind of figure out the best way to do it. But at the same time, I want to see the minority caucus do this themselves, and then others support it, right? And so they have artists that are willing to do it. They have if they need to raise the funding to do it, then I told her to let us know, and so that we can help in participating with that. But this is, if you will, their party, but we're invited. So that's just new business. Kind of wanted to throw that out there. So if you see some things happening in that realm, the art that I sent to her, which seems to be a little bit of the new flag, right? So that it includes all the colors. This is what Black Lives Matter has used in other incidences, and so it's approved by them, I understand, as a group, so that it includes trans colors. And so I've sent that to her, and so we'll see whether or not it's something that we can help collaborate with. Then we will. But so that's all my official LGBTQ caucus business that I have. If there are other matters, I'm eager to hear. Mr. Bradford, what you got?
All right, so as we all know, I had a resolution last time that was deferred. So in the amendments packet on Monday, you're going to be seeing a substitute resolution. I've been working on changes to make it more representative and more palatable, I guess you could say. And so I've been reaching out to different organizations, and I wanted to ask if the caucus itself thought that there would be any need or any desire to have an LGBT group as part of this process. The process itself, it's not going to be requesting that they be part of an actual selection committee, but because of an idea I was given by the Equity Alliance that these groups are actually, the hope would be the mayor's office would engage these groups to conduct listening sessions and public input to provide back to the mayor's office. So, you know, would have TURT to handle the Latino and immigrant population, the Equity Alliance for the African American population. The Human Relations Commission has liked what I'm doing, and some of their suggestions are being put into this resolution as well. So again, if y'all think that it would be beneficial to or know of a particular LGBT group that would want to partner or would be willing to partner with the mayor's office to do either a listening session or a survey on what matters to the LGBTQ community and a new police chief, I'm open to those suggestions.
Brett, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you know, this is another one of those things where, again, I really appreciate Councilmember Bradford for thinking to do this in terms of issuing a resolution. You know, from my experience, when you this is probably something that's better done with a letter. I mean, you're going to hear this from me probably more and more, because I think in our zeal as a council body, I think a lot of our members are wanting to introduce legislation early, and in certain circumstances that can be a really good way to start a conversation or go on the public record. Sometimes, you know, a letter, like we talked about, a letter can actually be a more effective way of stating an opinion or a desire or inviting a conversation than a resolution. I really appreciate Councilmember Bradford working on the deferral, especially appreciate you working with the Metro Human Relations Commission, which is always great. They're such a resource. It's one of the largest commissions that we have in Metro government. And of course, the LGBT community is very, very well represented on the commission. One of my hesitations about doing something like this that includes a list is that I say a person, when anyone starts to sort of compile a list, we think that we're being inclusive, but there are people that are left out for whatever reason. And it sort of can sometimes raise more questions than are answered, and that desire to do a list. And so that is a lot of my hesitation about this resolution. The intentions are great. We definitely want to make sure that different stakeholders are heard. It's just that once you start, you know, you pick a list and then people are like, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about the other? And so I'm just not sure that a resolution is the best way to go about it. That's all. I mean, I'm certainly willing to listen. Definitely I'm encouraged and appreciate Councilmember Bradford for reaching out to some of the different groups and especially for reaching out to the Metro Human Relations Commission which does the mobile diversity training that is done for the police department. So they have a big role to play in diversity efforts with the police department already. So that's fantastic. But just that is my caution, is that when we make a list, that there are people that are included or excluded, and that can sometimes cause hurt feelings, or just it's just one of those things. So I personally think that doing a letter or something like that is a better way to go about doing that. But appreciate the sponsor for reaching out to some other stakeholders in this. So that's all. Thank you.
Ditto.
I appreciate that feedback. And the original resolution, I tried to avoid making a list and tried to say and other groups, but of course there was pushback from some that felt like, well, that's too open-ended, we need a list. So I'm looking at groups that are what I consider a big umbrella, instead of focusing on individual groups, just looking at the groups that cover the widest area possible, the widest communities as possible. I appreciate the feedback though.
So recognizing that kind of struggle you've had on, well, some might want a list, some would not, what have you. Maybe that would indicate that maybe a resolution about, a non-binding resolution about all of this is not necessary, and that maybe in the line of what Brett was saying is that, send a letter, or, have you talked to the mayor about what it is how you think would be best? Just and offer your input. I will say, and I'm going to go slightly on a little bit of a tangent, and I apologize. I feel like this council especially has been resolution happy, and there have just been an exorbitant number of resolutions filed saying this or saying that, and and I wish Hannah was still with us so that she could hear me when I say that every time we ask for something like that, there is staff that is already inundated, that is now having to put together and come up with all the language and circulate and whatnot, resolutions that, quite frankly, and I will be chided for this, are meaningless. They're non-binding, and it's taking up a lot of time. So I guess I would just encourage everyone, and I wish I could get this message to the entire council, to really think about any resolution that you want to throw out there. Like, is this really going to do anything or really change the conversation? And if the answer is, well, I don't know, but I feel good about it, well, then maybe in the same vein as, once again, as what Brett was saying, send a letter, and don't take up the time of the legal staff that are understaffed and drowning me, because when you look at the counts of number of legislation filed of the last several councils, that number continues to grow astronomically. And I want us to be sensible to that. So I'm going to step off my soapbox. Yeah.
I know that someone had asked me, what's the difference between a resolution and a proclamation? And my definition as a resolution is something that you pass because 10, 20, 30 years from now, some kid's doing research and they want to look up historically what was significant at the time, what was appropriately something that had to be resolved by a body that was elected, that had something to say about a particular moment in time. A proclamation, which is just as incredibly emotional, is something that says this was historically significant in that we need to proclaim it on behalf of those present today, and as opposed to those that need to know later. And so resolutions are, in my book, not necessarily something that is supposed to cause action, because then it needs to be a bill. It needs to be something that actually doesn't. Non-binding resolutions mean I'm going to say this, but I'm not expecting anybody to do anything. So if the resolution is to resolve that something needs to be done, then just go do it, right? So I mean that's my perspective on it.
I will say I'm guilty of just that. But when I think it's of filing those, and I think some of that's a learning curve, right? But I think, Chair, you hit it right on the head there, and Councilmember Young, I think you did too, and it's important for me to hear as a freshman to keep that in mind.
This year is, I can't believe, by the way, it's happy early voting day. It's been a year, you guys. I mean, that's crazy, right? What a crazy first year. I can't even imagine. My first year, my first term, 6 months was spent touring water plants and figuring out how the city works, not in dealing with a pandemic. So I think everybody, you got to give a little grace to kind of learn how things are going on. Brett, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair Van Rees. Can everybody hear me? During the last term, I served on the Minority Caucus, and this is going to, again, go back to my stuff about sometimes letters versus a letter versus a proclamation versus a resolution. I served, we did have a lot of controversy during the last term. Oh my word, even early. But during the last term, we had a few things that were really controversial early on during Megan years. But one of those was Fort Negley, which was hugely controversial, right? What to do with Fort Negley. And I was serving on the Minority Caucus at that time, sort of as the LGBTQ rep, somewhat unofficially, but that was why I was there. The Minority Caucus did something that was really, really powerful, which is that they had a meeting and worked on a letter to Mayor Berry that said, we know that this site is really important in African American history, probably in Native American history, but definitely in African American history. And we support affordable housing. We support investment in a community that largely has been an African American neighborhood and has lacked investment. But the caucus went on record to say, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that there are people buried at that site, that it's a burial site. It's a burial site of African Americans who were conscripted into an army that was defending them, that also enslaved them. Like, that's difficult history. And before we start putting shovels into the ground, we expect this city to do its homework to make sure that we're not just, we're allowing people that were buried for whatever reason that their remains to lie in state, and that we honor them appropriately. And so the Minority Caucus issued a letter to Mayor Berry that says, we're willing to have a conversation with you going forward, but it is our expectation that the city will go to the greatest lengths possible to do archaeological research, do whatever you need to do to make sure that we're not going to disrespect the final resting place of people who died for freedom. And that was a letter. That wasn't a resolution. It wasn't all the, but that letter was so powerful, and it invited a conversation. It called for action, which happened. And so again, that's, but it's not like a resolution saying like, we go on record as saying blah, 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 because there was a lot of conversation about it. But letters, again, I just go back to a letter can be so powerful in shaping an outcome, in setting expectations, in inviting a response, in calling for action. A letter can do that. And sometimes a letter is something that is public record. It can be shared on your social media. It can be used to generate proponents for a cause. don't underestimate the power of a letter. I think in our community, just at large today, tweets, I mean, something that you do in a few seconds. I'm verbose, so it could take me all day to write a tweet, to edit it down. But don't underestimate the power of a letter. A letter is still part of a public record. I mean, just for all those things that I said. But I think especially for a really, really important decision like what Councilmember Bradford's wanting to offer insight on, a really important decision like how we go about selecting the next chief,
Yeah.
I think a letter can be really effective in a way that says like, hey, this is a group of folks that got together. We wanted to share our feedback. We don't want it to necessarily be the definitive, like the be all and the end all of the body, but I just feel like the effort that's gone into this already is really important. It comes from the right place. It doesn't necessarily have to be a resolution. I'm not saying whether I vote on it or not, but it's one thing for a group of folks to say, a group of folks, a council member had an idea, a group of council members got together, the lead person driving it got some good feedback. This is really good feedback that we want the mayor to consider. That is perfectly fine to do that in a letter. And it's perfect. It invites, again, it invites a conversation rather than being like, kind of to Councilmember Young's point, on this calendar, there were 17 resolutions and everyone's like, yeah, there are a bunch of resolutions. Sometimes when you have too many resolutions, it all kind of gets lost in the weeds sometimes too. So that's all. It's just kind of finding a balance, but also just thinking about like, when you're looking at what you're trying to do, what is the best way of doing what you're trying to do? And the effort and the work that's gone into it already has been great. So I applaud Councilmember Bradford for doing it. Just want everyone to kind of think about what are the different ways that we have of getting things done as a body. There was a resolution that was discussed at the last meeting where like there was a phrase in the resolution that caused council members not to want to vote for the resolution because of that phrase. If that had been done as a letter, it could have been sent out. The council office staff, which are our employees, could have said, does anyone have any revisions? And then folks could have focused a little bit more time on that phrase and whether they wanted or supported that phrase or not. And then it wouldn't have come up into this position of you're putting council members in a position of they're supposed to vote yes or no, or sort of abstain on something because of a phrase. Like they could have had a conversation about that phrase and maybe they would have supported it or not. But like I say, sometimes a letter can be really, really powerful and a really effective way of bringing about the change that we want in a way that invites a conversation. And a resolution gets passed and who knows what happens after it. I mean, sometimes there are resolutions that, have a budgetary impact or whatever, but sometimes a resolution that's non-binding, that's memorializing, it gets passed and who knows what happens with it. Whereas a letter, you can follow up on it and say, hey, we sent you a letter on this date and you haven't responded yet. But again, it's still inviting a conversation in a way that I think can be effective. And again, this is just feedback for all of us to think about the different tools that we have that are available to us as communicators, which really is our primary role as legislators.
It's extremely helpful, and I know that even the one letter that we sent in regard to sharing healthcare information. I mean, that letter did way more than it would have as a resolution. So we're a brand new caucus. We're just figuring this out, and so be thinking how we can take action through letters, because evidently Brett would love to write one for us. Emily, you had something that you wanted to talk about.
Thank you. I have 3 bills that I want to mention. One is the bill infamously known as the tear gas bill, which is going to be withdrawn, or I'm going to seek withdrawal of that bill. And I'll pontificate on that later, but it was never intended to actually, anyway, we'll take it there. It's going to be withdrawn on Tuesday night. The other 2 bills I want to mention, one is about personal delivery devices, PDDs. It's up for second reading. There's been 2 amendments that were filed today that'll be in the amendments packet. One says we're going to do more of a moratorium until we can find a better solution. That moratorium would go through October 31st. It appears that there is corporate support for that for the two major companies. Actually, there is corporate support, as I understand it, through this afternoon for FedEx and Amazon to support that. There is a second amendment that Councilmember Mendez and I are both on. So I decided to jump on it because I think it may be a better solution than doing just that temporary moratorium. And that will be to put, instead of doing a total and complete ban, it will say we're not allowed for until October 31st. And then for every 3 months thereafter, it will stay in place until the city finds a way to get this done. So the whole purpose here, if I can lobby you guys to tell you, these devices exist. I think that they are a potential good solution for Nashvillians to help get trucks off of the street and to put these devices on our sidewalks. But we also all know our sidewalk infrastructure stinks in the city. And so what happens when one of these devices is going down the sidewalk with a utility pole in it and somebody in a wheelchair is there, or a mom and her with her, or a dad with their baby in the buggy, you know, what happens to the device? And so we've got to find a way to regulate that so that the companies that want to put these out there are successful in them. Also, we have two major companies who are talking about bringing these, but I don't know of any small companies. So Nancy, you and I might decide, and we're not going to, right? But you and I might decide that we want to start up a personal delivery device business and get them all over every sidewalk in Nashville. We need to have control of that so that our taxpayers who are paying for our infrastructure have control over those sidewalks. So that's the intent of that bill. I hope if you guys have any questions tonight would be great, but also in committee and on the floor is good too. And then the final bill that I wanted to talk about was the construction hours from 7A to 7P. That is something that, so currently you can, in residential neighborhoods, and this bill is only about residential neighborhoods, you can, a builder can come and work from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Not very residentially, you know, neighborhood friendly. And we've heard from the community last year, neighborhoods. So this is a bill that specifically focuses on quality of life for Nashvillians in their home. 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is a time frame that we see in other cities throughout the state, as well as peer cities throughout the country, especially here in this region. And again, it's not intended to penalize anybody, but most people, as I understand it, most builders, from my experience in talking with folks about this bill, aren't typically working at those hours anyway. So I believe I'll be able to get their support on this, and maybe we need to make some variance type process or an exception, a codes exception that the codes department might be able to authorize. If somebody needs to do some drywall work inside of XYZ residential property at 8 p.m. on a Saturday night, then, you know, there might be a reason to do that. But the purpose of the role is to really make things more friendly. And I see Chance coming for a visit there, Nancy.
Yeah, she's always around. She pretty much lives underneath my desk. So there's, I have a question. It's 7 to 7, 7 days a week, or Monday through Friday, Monday through Saturday?
Monday through Saturday. So today the law is 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday. No work on Sundays without a special permit for that. As I understand it, codes under the last director and the current director have not issued any Sunday permits. So, you know, but yeah, it's Monday through Saturday. That's not to say that in this particular case, Mr. Herbert has said that, you know, he will look at every bit of this. He wants to do whatever, or he will do whatever the council decides. But that's where I think, you know, there might be some room to put an amendment on this if necessary. If you hear from your constituents, or if we hear from the builder community that they would like us to make an exception, I think it's important for us to give them a tool to do so, so that then the codes department can make sure that, you know, we need development. We need more housing in this city. We're short on housing, especially affordable housing. If working 3 extra hours a day is going to help us get to a goal where we have more housing that we need, I don't want to stand in the way of that. But I also don't want somebody disturbing the peace next door to whomever, next door to every District 7 resident, you know, who's where there's a lot of, you know, development happening in Inglewood. So it is a citywide bill. And so I definitely want to hear from my other 39 colleagues about what, if this meets their needs in their districts as well.
That's a great report. Anybody have any questions for Emily about any of that?
I don't really
Okay.
have a question. I just wanted to say, I was very early on a co-signer on this because this was something I've heard and I've gotten complaints for in my district is people working on houses or building houses next door to people or building behind a subdivision, and they're starting at 6 a.m. or while most of these people are still asleep, especially on a Saturday. So when I saw that she was doing this bill, I immediately signed on because I think we do need to kind of protect our neighborhoods, protect our neighbors, and try to tighten that little window so you don't have people, banging up drywall or doing heavy construction at 6 a.m. on a Saturday.
Yeah. Brett, you had something?
Russ?
Yeah, I have concerns about the bill. I definitely have a lot of constituents who complain about noise. When it again goes back to, for me, like when their house is being built, like they've got no issues with noise when it's their house that's being built or renovated, or they've waited a year to get on a list for a kitchen contractor and they're getting a home addition done. So, but when it's the neighbor's house, then that's a problem. And that's a lot of it for me is like, if we drag out construction time frames, equipment on site, costs to commercial, that's one thing, although in our neighborhoods we have a lot of commercial next to it. But what I'm really, really concerned about is the residential. I mean, frankly, I'm worried about what the potential impact is on people getting a roof on their house, like for my tornado victims, or just for folks getting a house done or renovation done. I want to make sure that we're not listening to a neighbor that's, their sleep was disturbed, whatever, it goes late at night. I understand all that, but I just want to make sure that we really have an understanding of how that is going to affect time frames to get a project completed and cost for homeowners
Um,
before we make a decision on it.
I'm sorry to interrupt. A question came to mind. Emily, does it differentiate between interior and exterior work?
It doesn't today, and this doesn't change that. But again, I think, there is, those concerns are so valid. And, it goes back to that, what's the inventory look like? What do we need in order to house more Nashvillians and keep them in Davidson County? That's absolutely a concern. And when this was up for, this has been deferred. It won't be up on Tuesday. It'll be up in the first meeting in August. And some of the research that I've done on that and addresses Brett's questions. I still have a couple of calls out to builders associations to see, what feedback they have. And I'm completely open to creating exceptions that are manageable, right? So I don't want to create an exception that then requires additional work and cost, et cetera, by Metro. But I do think that, there are valid reasons why somebody might need to work at 6 a.m. Concrete in the summertime, for instance, or hours are, it's daylight for, later. And there are some laws in those peer cities that say during the summer months, you can work until dusk or whatever. So there's a lot to be learned from what's going on elsewhere. But I think, we've also, we've been very friendly to developers, and that's good. We need this development, but at what expense? And so Brett's point about, it's when it's a NIMBY situation, right? It's a NIMBY situation and then it's a problem. But when it's for my own house, please come get it done. So we've got to, help people understand that this is about the quality of life for everybody. This is about all of us, not one of us. And, what is the right solution? I think that if we find something that's similar in other cities, Memphis, Chattanooga, Charlotte, those are areas that I've looked at. Matt Wilkinson has helped me look at that as I gather more data to bring in front of the committee and get a letter out to the entire council prior to that August 4th meeting. I hope that I will address that. But if you have any concerns like that, please share them with me through the council office. I definitely want to make sure they are addressed, because I don't want to make a bad law. And again, it's a countywide law that impacts all of us and all of your constituents. So I don't want to do something that is going to be detrimental. I want this to be a good thing for the builder community as well. They're Nashvillians too, right?
For the most part. I have a couple of different things I want to mention. Is any other questions for Emily on this? I don't see any hands. Okay.
Well, if I can interject really quickly, I apologize to do this. I guess I didn't realize we'd be running so long, but I actually have some supper plans that I'm late for, so I'm gonna hop off.
Well, if you'll indulge me to let you know what's going on, and I don't, Emily, I don't know what you're showing us there, but okay. There's going to be in your amendment packet some amendments to Kathleen Murphy's lobbying bill that I want to bring your attention to that I've introduced. So when you get your amendment packet, look for them. Feel free to reach out through the council office if you have questions. There will also be a late filed amendment from Freddie O'Connell, I believe, addressing some of the things that were left out of the Murphy bill that we thought were going to be in. So there will be a lot of discussion on that third bill. So I encourage you guys to pay attention to it. I know she's not going to be happy about all these amendments, and so there's that to keep in mind. So I just want to bring your guys' attention. It has gone on and on and on, and it has not gotten better. It's still confusing, and we're going to have to now talk about it, or it's on third reading, so I don't even know if it can be deferred. So there's going to be a little drama. So I just want to give you guys a little heads up on that particular thing. Zach, I appreciate the fact that you got to go. I thought we'd be done by 7:30. I should have indicated that to you. I'll be more diligent in that regard in the future. We should not be ever going longer than 2 hours. So if we do, I will cut it off anyway. The only other thing that we had down was to set a date for our next meeting. So if anybody has any objections at all about tentatively grabbing a similar Friday 2 months from now, just randomly, and then we can change that if we find conflicts along the way, and that would be the third Friday in September, which is randomly September the 18th. Is that okay to just kind of hold that date? Oh, one more thing. It was brought to my attention that I said a word that I've never said, I don't think, in my entire life, which is the word transsexual. I don't think, like, what is that? Is it 1960? So let me repeat. Black lives matter, lesbian lives matter, gay lives matter, bisexual lives matter, trans lives matter, queer lives matter, all Black lives matter. And if there are no other business before the committee, I call for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, peace. Thank you guys. Have a great weekend. You deserve it. Ciao.